Changes are on the way when it comes to gender pay gap reporting for quite a number of businesses. And to find out more about this issue, which is getting increasing attention, I'm speaking with Sonia Boyce, a director in Forvis Mazars Consulting, and she leads the People Consulting and Organisational Development Service line. Sonia, welcome to Business Matters. Now, I have to confess, whilst I have heard of the gender pay gap and have some limited knowledge of it, I really am looking forward to finding out a lot more about this, because this is something that it's a relatively new phenomenon, I suppose you could say, here in Ireland, and dates back to the Gender Pay Gap Information Act, which was as recent as 2021. So perhaps you can just maybe start explaining what exactly the gender pay gap is and how our legislation has come in, and we'll look at how it's going to affect particularly smaller businesses, which wouldn't have been affected when it first came into being part of our legislation.
Yes, hello Chris. Thank you for having me on your show today. We're delighted to join and to share a little bit of insight around gender pay gap reporting. So yes, as you mentioned there, we have been working on this area in Forvis Mazars for quite some time now. And certainly, particularly since the enactment of the Gender Pay Gap Information Act originally in 2021, we've worked with many organisations supporting them in terms of their reporting requirements in relation to gender pay gap reporting. The gender pay gap, I suppose in layman's terms, is best understood as, I suppose, the difference in hourly average wages between men and women. And that figure is typically reported as an average, a mean figure, and also a median value placed in that. So the Gender Pay Gap Act of 2021 introduced in the first instance that any company with 250 employees or more were mandated to report on their GPG figure. And that was then further reduced in 2024 to any employer with a headcount of 150 employees or more. And now most pertinently for this year, we now have that reporting threshold has been further reduced to include any organisation with 50 employees or more. So that very substantially, I suppose, changes the reporting requirement for a large proportion of Irish businesses who now, I suppose, come into scope for mandatory gender pay gap reporting.
So they have to make a report, they're going to have to fill in documentation. Where is this sent to, or where can one access it?
Yes, so the regulations themselves sort of stipulate 8 separate areas that have to be reported on primarily. But I think one of the other more substantial changes in relation to this year's reporting cycle is that we are anticipating that the long-awaited Gender Pay Gap Reporting Portal, which will be a centralised reporting tool, that is due to be launched in the coming weeks, and we anticipate that is going to be available for this reporting cycle, which will be for November 2025, so in 2 months' time. It was Mr. Foley who reported that the portal will be made live, and that announcement was on International Women's Day in March of this year. And that particular portal will, I suppose, allow all organisations to centrally report, and will then also allow the general public to have clear access to the various results across Irish businesses and across different sectors and industries, etc. So we do anticipate that portal will be available for this year's reporting cycle, so that will have a centralised visibility then in terms of gender pay gap figures across many Irish businesses.
And I suspect one question that some of those companies that maybe have over 50 employees or organisations will be asking is just how time-consuming is this process going to be? Is there a lot of work in compiling what is required to fill in and make sure that you're complying with the requirements?
Yes, and I think that's one of the things that we have definitely seen and learned from supporting such a wide variety of clients to date. As a calculation, the gender pay gap figure itself to arrive at the particular data involves data sets from both payroll, from record keeping requirements in relation to time and hours, etc., and also HR data. So therein, I suppose, lies the complexity for a lot of organisations, in terms of a lot of that data is not centrally available on one nice little system. You might be looking at HR data separately, you may be looking at rostering systems, etc., in terms of actual hours worked. You may also then have to, you will be looking then at pulling from payroll data, etc. So there is complexity and there is, I suppose, quite a bit of work involved in ensuring that the data that you're using and that is available to you is correct data, and that it has been checked. It does have quite a bit of complexity to it, and I think in the last number of years where we've been supporting a range of clients, in terms of their own calculations, it's something that I suppose takes a lot longer than people anticipate in the first instance. So obviously for this year, the reporting deadline is November, using your payroll snapshot date from June 2025. So the reporting period has also been brought back a month. So in previous years, it was your reporting deadline was actually December of the year, but this year it's now actually been brought back to November, using the snapshot date of June 2025, as I said there. So you have a 5-month window now in which to actually gather your data, ensure that data is accurate, it's transparent, it's been properly reviewed, and the calculation is 100% accurate. So there's, the clock is ticking, so to speak,
and
in terms of that prep time,
For people who must comply with the regulations, would many do it in-house, or are many going to subcontract and get in some form of consultancy to assist in this matter?
Well, my experience, and I suppose from the consulting perspective that I'm coming from, we are supporting a wide range of clients, and what we are trying to do is also enable people to set them up for success in terms of future years reporting requirements as well. And to actually, I suppose, our offering is not only based on the calculation, but also based on expanding out building out the narrative to support whatever the calculation finding itself is, and I suppose then to put in building blocks in terms of either looking to reduce that gender pay gap figure if one exists, or particularly look at establishing a pipeline there where there's I suppose tangible action been able to take to keep that gender pay gap figure as low as possible for that organisation. Just to illustrate, I suppose that like anything, when things do begin to be measured, we do see improvement. So the Chartered Institute of Personnel Development, the CIPD, they have recently published a report which actually does show that a third of reporting organisations are now seeing their gender pay gap figure reducing year on year, and that actually the compliance figures overall in terms of gender pay gap reporting, that has significantly increased in the tenure of the introduction of the legislation overall. Our current figure, the most recent gender pay gap figure we have available, is from 2022, which shows a GPG figure of 9.6% in favour of men. So that, again, it has been reducing year on year. That I think the previous figure to that was from 2 years previous again, and we were at about 13%. So there is a reduction overall, Chris, and again, it is going in the right direction, albeit sort of a little bit slower maybe than a lot of people would like. But again, I do liken it to the fact that it's all comes down to measurement as well, and what gets measured gets tracked, and from there we do see real progress. So albeit the progress is slower than we would maybe have anticipated and would like, the progress is there. And I think just to bring true confusion to your listeners today, there is another piece of legislation known as to be introduced this year as well, which is the Equal Pay Transparency Directive, that is going to further expand the reporting requirements under gender pay gap reporting there, in terms of that is going to basically mandate that any organisation who has a gender pay gap figure of over 5% in any category of workers, that then they would have to look at joint pay assessments and things like that. So that piece of legislation is coming into play in June 2026.
So just looking at why the gender pay gap does actually occur, I take it the vast majority of employers, what they pay is the same, be you male or female, but the main reason for the difference is really down to women not being equally represented in more senior positions, or maybe working in more lower skilled or part-time roles. So is it almost inevitable that over time this is changing for the better?
Yes, yeah, I think so, and like you're correct in that it does come down to, and a very significant proportion of it is a representation issue. It is reasonable to hope that that representation issue, will begin to decrease over the next few years. Um, but again, it is really important, I think, from an employer perspective, to be able to communicate and to be able to, explain the steps that you are taking to eliminate the gaps that you may have. And I suppose in particular to look at it as an assessment, to look at the assessment of the causes behind the gap. If you have a figure that is, in any way over the 5%, really is that's going to become, I think, the new threshold figure, to be honest, Chris. And also then importantly to be able to communicate that not only to your internal stakeholders and your staff, but also I think in a wider external stakeholder perspective as well, to be able to explain that, to your sort of community at large, etc.
A gender pay gap, it doesn't necessarily mean that there is pay discrimination within an organisation.
No, but again, it comes down to it's that representational piece, so looking at your overall cohort of employees, and particularly, I suppose, what we typically see in many organisations is that, at the more junior levels or the lower levels within the staffing cohort, that, there's pay transparency, that there's complete equality between genders. But it's as people progress through the organisations then that you seem to, that there tends to be either attrition of senior female talent, or indeed, sort of what people call the motherhood penalty sometimes, where there's a further take up of, part-time hours, or general loss of female talent through, caring responsibilities overall. And then that can be further amplified at senior management level, then that it's predominantly one gender over the other, then that's where I suppose you can begin to see the gender pay gaps. So they're the sorts of things, I suppose, to be cognizant of in terms of how to reduce and how to eliminate the gender pay gap overall. It's to look at that talent, look at the retention strategies that are in place, and to ensure, I suppose, that not only from a female perspective, but also from a male perspective, that the policies you have in place are supportive of both genders. So we still see typically in Ireland the take up of for example, paternity leave or parental leave by male colleagues tends to be significantly lower than that of female colleagues.
The very fact that the Gender Pay Gap Information Act wasn't signed into law until July 2021, is Ireland relatively recent to the table? I take it a lot of this has been driven from a European perspective.
Yes, yeah. There's, I suppose, this has been predominantly led from a European perspective, and Ireland were one of the slower countries off the mark in relation to the mandatory element of it, albeit a lot of organisations had actually started already assessing their gender pay gap information in advance of the legislation enactment. But certainly against some of our European neighbours, we would see there, for example, in Belgium or Luxembourg, very, very, low gender pay gap figures.
Many organisations and companies, they may have an action plan to sort of resolve this matter and to narrow that gap, but this could take quite a number of years. Maybe by having this reporting now, I take it that'll all help feed into how they can take steps to reduce the gender pay gap.
Absolutely. And I think the fact as well, Chris, that it is now an annual requirement, it is very much sitting on the board agendas of many organisations as a key reporting metric. And I think really as we move into more and more of an age of transparency, and where we see much more focus on European directives coming through, I think that there are both, there's risk and opportunity around gender pay gap for sure, but it really is more of an opportunity to ensure that actually if there are unexplained or unaddressed pay gaps, that there is action to be taken in relation to those. For employers who do take ownership of their data, they will be able to publish then meaningful commentary and to demonstrate the progress that they are making, year on year, and to, I suppose, really ultimately distinguish themselves as leaders from a quality, diversity and inclusion perspective as well. So I think that's the key message I would have for your listeners is all around, I suppose, that piece, around transparency, ensuring that actually the pay data that we're all privy to, etc., is done in a way that actually is building trust and confidence within your own organisation's culture.
And what happens if a business doesn't comply? Are there going to be penalties?
So originally, just before the enactment of this legislation, there was lots of talks about whether or not there would be fines attached. So to date, there are no fines attached to the gender pay gap reporting as it currently stands. Now, whether or not that is going to be expanded upon in the Equal Pay Transparency Directive that will be coming in this year, that remains to be seen. And there is, I suppose, there is talks about that there may well be, further sanction attached to non-compliance, etc. But in general terms, I think, the main risks that organisations that we've been supporting would report on, it's really actually around reputational risk, and organisations want to do the right thing. They want to understand if there's a gap, why is there a gap, what they can do about it, and to take the steps to meaningfully reduce that where possible.
Yeah, and maybe for a company that's recruiting, this can be certainly a very positive side of the company if people see that it's a company where that gender pay gap is being reduced, so it could give them a competitive advantage.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the things that we will see this year with the introduction of the new portal. We'll now be able to very clearly see, where you're standing against, in a sort of a leaderboard way against your immediate competitors, etc. So for sure, there's real benefit to, having a gender pay gap figure that is as low as possible.
So finally, Sonia, just summing things up, if you are in a business with 50 or more employees or an organisation, you're going to be, you have to report by law now the gender pay gap. If you're not familiar or you haven't done any research yet, what's the best way to go about finding out more information?
Yeah, well, I suppose firstly I'd say to people to familiarise yourself the legislation. There's a very good guidance document on gov.ie, and people can definitely take that on as a sort of first step in terms of familiarising yourself with the exact requirements. But then it's really about that analysis of your pay data. So ensuring that your pay data is up to date, that you have clear hourly information in relation to each individual employee, and also then that you're conducting a review of your overall HR policies and procedures as well, so that you're understanding, I suppose, that the HR contextual piece as well that underpins all of the gender pay gap activity then as well. Time is of the essence. The fact that the reporting deadline now has been brought back a month to November of this year, and I suppose we're already well into September at this stage now. It is key that organisations treat this as an absolute priority reporting metric, and allow yourself the time that it does take to run the calculation. And again, if anybody does require any assistance, we'd obviously be delighted to help here at Mazars. But certainly, time is of the essence, Chris. Get looking at that data ASAP would be my takeaway.
And my thanks to Sonia Boyce, who is a director with Forvis Mazars Consulting.